Hi there. So today we are going to talk about compost screening, and you don't need to screen compost necessarily if you're not that fussy about how it looks and how much is broken down. In truth, that material will continue to break down in your garden, even if it's not the pieces aren't all uniform. But now, if you want to use your compost for a variety of things, then screening is a good approach to take. For example, if you are taking compost out of your bin and there's still large chunks that aren't broken down, a screen can separate those items. Now, this is just a small bit of a half-inch piece of hardware cloth, just some scrap left over for when I built a screen earlier. And the idea here is these half-inch squares are pretty much only going to allow material that is that size or smaller to pass through, and everything else we would actually put back into the top of the compost bin so they can break down even further. And you may have to do that 2 or 3 times for certain things. The husk of certain nuts and corn cob are examples of things that may have to go in a couple times. So this would be the size of the squares that we would use on our first stage screener. Now that material is, again, it's compost. It's ready to be used, except it's quite coarse, mixed in with some of the finer stuff. Now there's another piece of hardware cloth, and these are generally available at your home improvement stores and your hardware stores. And this is a 1/4-inch screen piece of hardware cloth. I use this to separate pieces of material that are between the size of a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch. And that material that doesn't go through, I will actually use as a mulch in the garden bed, just as a top dressing. It'll help to keep the weeds at bay. As the material breaks down, it'll continue to feed the soil. It allows moisture to be stored longer in the soil without evaporation. It covers the bare soil. So that is an option. Some people will use leaves, grass, wood chips. I find that because we're producing compost anyways, we might as well use that material. And again, it does break down over time. So anything that then comes through the 1/4 inch is what I call quality soil amendment. I would put that into the garden beds in the spring or in the fall and incorporate that in the top inch or 2 of the soil, and there it will feed the plants and help with just sustaining the plants through the growing season. For indoor applications and seed starting, I would actually go then down to a 1/8 inch screen. And the reason for this is, at this point, you're trying to remove any seeds that might have, a little bit larger seeds that might have come through, some eggshells that are a little bit chunky. Because if I'm going to, and again, also too, I would use anything that I would screen through here as a pot in a growing pot. So for compost, I would only use that for outdoor growing, because I don't really want to bring any pathogens inside, so they can get out of control. But it also helps to just give you a really nice fine mix that you can add to existing potting mix that you might buy, coconut coir, peat moss, and it's going to have all the organic matter and nutrients that a potted plant is going to need. I grow a lot of veg in pots because some of them are harder to grow in zone 3, things like eggplant, peppers, and so that way growing in a pot allows me to control where the pot is, the water, the moisture level of the soil. so on and so forth. So it's nice when you can have a finer material in that pot. And compost is actually quite light compared to dirt, so you'd never really want to use garden soil in a pot anyways. I also use this screen size for screening out the worm castings when I'm harvesting the castings out of the bins, because again, anything that's bigger or that's clumped, I don't really want that in my finished product. So this way I can get rid of that, and I have a bucket here of coarser material that didn't go through the screen, and this is what it looks like. And this will just get reincorporated into one of the worm bins, and it'll continue to break down a little bit once it rehydrates. Now lastly, this is what it looks like. It is a strainer that you'd use for in a kitchen for pasta, or washing leafy greens, or so on and so forth. These, I don't know the exact size of these squares. It looks like it's about 1/16 inch. If I wanted super fine worm castings, no eggs, anything in them, this is what I would use. And often I'll only use this if I'm actually going to sell the castings, because then it just gives a better quality product with a much higher or much lower risk of other seeds and other things being in the mix. So I just find that from a quality perspective, this does a really, really excellent job. This is a little bit of overkill, and most times you can get away with just a 1/8 inch screen. So a couple examples of screeners, and these are all homemade of course, this is your standard square screener. This is has a 1/8 inch piece of hardware cloth, and I'm just using 1x4s for the frame, and they're screwed in together out at the edges, and I wrap the cloth around the frame once it's built. I secure the rough edges with another piece, which is about I don't know, maybe it's 1x1, nothing too big, and then just screw it in. This is just to keep those sharp edges from becoming too much of a problem, and also keeps the screen from lifting off the frame. And then on the sides, I wrap the hardware cloth and then secure it with another piece of strapping here, and this gives you a completely enclosed system for screening out your compost. And you can do this for a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch piece of hardware cloth, so that way you have your different granularities or fineness of screening. I also made, and I think I talked about this before, what is a cylinder wrapped with hardware cloth. And the idea here, I use this again primarily for sorting worm castings, because with any of these flat screeners, you're agitating the material to try to get it through the holes. So if you had worms in there, you could do some harm to the worms. So that's not my preference. I've done it before, but I'm also careful to pick out the worms as I see them. But using this system allows the worms to just kind of go through the system. They're not being crushed, and then they pop out at the end, and what comes down through the bottom is screened worm castings. So in a nutshell, and these are easy to build, just a couple buckets, pails that are cut down, screwed in, and a lid at one end with a bit of a lip left on it so that the material doesn't pop out at the entrance, and the hardware cloth is overlaid at the entrance point so that the material just passes through without coming through any kind of gaps, and then it's pushed into the bucket at the end for the same reason. So you just get this nice continuous flow where the castings aren't going to come out anywhere except at the very end of the container. This, and it's a trommel, but this is a hand-powered trommel, not a motorized one. And then This is just a fixture that I found with some casters on it, but easily can be built on wood with some casters from the hardware stores, and the cylinder sits on the casters and it allows it to be turned. And what you do is you just elevate it slightly at one end, at the input end, just so that the material will actually flow through. And you don't have to have a steep angle. A slight angle is enough just to allow gravity to move that stuff down the cylinder and out. So generally that is, those are the things you would use or for screening, whether it's your worm castings or your compost. And again, a lot of this is subjective and optional, but as you do it, any of it, you'll start to see the differences in how your compost looks, and also it gives you some flexibility in terms of how you can use your compost. Hopefully that helps, and in our next video I will actually show screening of some compost going through the hand trommel.